20 years ago, if you took any type of steroid, you were like taking drugs, like you were just scum. And now it's 20 years later that it's accepted.
Absolutely.
If you take oral steroids too long, it can cause liver damage.
There's a methylation process called 17-alpha alkylation that actually helps to protect a steroid molecule from the first pass in the liver.
You know, the first steroid I went on was Dianabol.
Absolutely. Dianabol is probably one of the core original oral anabolics that have been used since the 1960s.
What do you think of Anavar as a steroid?
I think oxyandrolone is probably one of the best and safest oral anabolic compounds that there is. It does not convert to estrogen.
I've used called Anadrol, Anadrol 50. That is the king of orals that I feel gives you the most strength gains, but it is one of the more toxic steroids.
Absolutely.
If someone wants to gain strength and muscle mass, what are the SARMs to get?
The most popular one by far is the RAD 140, and there's a lot of different options.
Hey guys, Rich Gaspari here, and I'm excited to have another episode of Beyond the Muscle, and I have Andy Triggs here. I guess was on the show already. 19 years experience in anti-aging, hormone replacement therapy. You come from Renew Vitality as your company. We're going to be doing some really cool talks on a taboo matter. We're going to talk about oral steroids, SARMs. You're the expert in this, so we're going to talk a lot of things that a lot of people want to learn about, even myself, even though I'm not taking these anymore, but I did take a lot of these when I competed in the Mr. Olympia. So let's do this episode and let's have some fun here talking about oral steroids, SARMs, and all that great stuff.
Outstanding, Rich. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and do another episode with you. But yeah, so there's a lot of discussion, interest in oral anabolic steroids and versus oral SARMs and the difference between them and their applications, you know, in bodybuilding and anti-aging medicines. So we'd love to get into kind of to differentiate the both of them for the audience.
So I know with experience that if you take oral steroids too long, it can cause liver damage. There's something called 17-alpha or alkaline. What's the...
Yeah, there's a methylation process called 17-alpha alkylation that actually helps to protect a steroid molecule from the first pass in the liver. Most oral anabolic steroids have this methylation that helps them to make it through the liver to be able to, you know, be absorbed into the bloodstream.
So without that, if you took orals and they didn't have this 17-alpha alkylation, the steroid would be destroyed by the liver.
That's exactly right.
So by having this 17-alpha alkylation is preserved so that it can be used in your body for its effect, but then it can actually raise the liver enzymes and cause some liver damage.
They are hepatotoxic, and some are more toxic than others. Some are dosage dependent as well, but they can raise things like AST and ALT, and that's why it's important to cycle them. And we'll talk more about cycling as well. But you do also want to have something that can support your liver and maintain healthy liver enzymes if you are going to use like a methylated anabolic steroid that's an oral compound.
Cool. I could talk my personal usage. You know, the first steroid I went on was Dianabol. It's probably like most of the steroids that people take, you know, it's that steroid that you get the most effect with strength gains. I saw weight gain. Great steroid. I know that's both androgenic and anabolic, but it has more of an androgenic effect. So it's going to make you hold a little bit more water, but it's great for strength gains.
Absolutely. Dianabol is probably one of the core original oral anabolics that have been used since the 1960s. The reason that it has some of those effects is it also it converts to estrogen, so you do have some aromatization. And that's where some of the water retention or the potential gynecomastia comes from. And there's oral steroids that will aromatase and those that won't. And that's where some of your bulking versus cutting stereotypes, you know, with oral anabolics come from.
And then there's the other steroids more for cutting, which are the Anavar or the Winstrol. But one of my favorites, you know, that not many people know about is Dianabol.
Absolutely. And that's another drug that's a DHT derivative that doesn't convert into estrogen, that allows you to get that drier, like leaner look that's designed more for cutting than it is for bulking.
It's funny because, you know, Dianabol was a steroid used by, I guess it was in the 70s. One of the Olympics, I think it was the 72 Olympics, that the East Germans just like cleaned up. It beat everybody throughout the world, and they were known to have used Dianabol as a steroid because A, it's very anabolic. You're not holding much water on it. It is safe. I can tell you, I've taken Dianabol and have checked my liver enzymes, and they didn't elevate that much using 40 milligrams. It was a great steroid to take that I feel, I mean, they're all dangerous. You have to be careful. It's one of the safer ones.
Absolutely. I mean, anabolic steroids are not the boogeyman that everybody thought they were back in the 80s. You know, the government came as far as to say that anabolic steroids don't cause muscle growth. I think anybody who's ever taken a steroid knows that that's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
But when used properly, when cycled, you know, they can be effective and you can mitigate the side effects, but they have to be used smartly. And then one of the goals is to try to offer some insight into the difference between oral anabolics and SARMs and kind of full disclosure on both the benefits and the potential side effects.
And then there are the cutting steroids that, I've used to right before a show would be Anavar and Winstrol. For me, Anavar was like one of the best steroids to really bring on muscle density. Back in the day, there were little footballs. They were 2.5 milligrams. And I think the most they've ever taken was like 10 a day. Now they sell Anavar that's like 20 and 40 milligrams per pill.
Oh, you'll see guys go as much as 100 milligrams a day
I never
on
taken that
Anavar.
much. And it's just amazing how today's guys who are taking steroid usage are so much higher than what I took. And I've actually, been on my Instagram talking about my dosages, being very free, talking about it. And they all told me I was lying about the dosage I was taking. I know what I was taking. I would take 10 Anavar, which if you do 2.5 milligrams is like 25 milligrams.
Absolutely.
Of Anavar. What do you think of Anavar as a steroid?
I think oxyandrolone is probably one of the best and safest oral anabolic compounds that there is. It does not convert to estrogen. It has a minimal effect on liver enzymes. It's usually dosage dependent. It's something that's used by both male and female athletes alike. It does have a negative effect on HDL cholesterol, which is your good cholesterol. So you have to be mindful of that. So things like fish oil, niacin, things that will help to support your HDL is definitely essential. There's also pharmaceuticals like we discussed earlier. Actually, there's some options for raising HDL, but oxyandrolone or Anavar is probably one of the most widely used and safer compounds, especially for things like contest prep.
Well, you hear even women, competing, pro women are using Anavar as their go-to steroid because it causes less side effects. Male characteristics and hair growth. A lot of women are using Anavar as a steroid.
Well, and that's where you get into your androgenic versus anabolic balance. And every steroid has kind of an androgenic versus anabolic profile. And the Anavar slants much more towards the anabolic benefits than it does the androgenic. It still has a slight androgenic effect. Women can still see some masculinizing effects, especially dosage dependent. But for the most part, they get a pretty good anabolic effect. And as long as they cycle it, it can produce good results without a lot of negative outcomes.
Then the other one comes in injectable form and in oral form is Winstrol. What's your take on Winstrol pills?
Winstrol, or the drug name stanozolol, it's a tough drug. It's rough on your heart. It's rough on your liver. It has a hugely negative impact on your HDL cholesterol. But nothing will get a drier looking, lean, chiseled physique, especially for contest prep. For folks who are like the last weeks in preparation for a show, it's just profound. The one thing is it seems to suck a lot of the liquid out of the joints too. So you see a lot of guys who are on Winstrol end up with joint injuries and pec tears, bicep tears, things like that. So it's really one of those drugs that's great in the short term for a very specific purpose. But in the long term, it definitely is not. It's one of the less safe steroids.
So it's one of the less safer steroids. Contest prep, would you say 2 or 3 weeks out from a show, use it only right before the show to give you more of a dry look?
I think like no more than 6 weeks probably, but it's a profoundly effective drug. It has androgenic effect, an anabolic effect. It has a muscle preserving benefit, but it really does. It seems to have an effect on drying out a physique, and almost every male contest prep guru uses Winstrol and going into a show.
Another one that I've used called Anadrol 50. That is the king of orals that I feel gives you the most strength gains, but it is one of the more toxic steroids.
Absolutely. Anadrol is, they come typically in 50 milligram tablets, and they're taken 1, 2, 3 a day, depending on this, the individual. And in the higher level competitive athletes, especially in a bulking cycle, Anadrol is phenomenal. It does convert to estrogen. It aromatizes. But in the past, I've taken Anadrol and the results were spectacular. The strength gains are unbelievable. It puffs you up like a cartoon character. You retain a lot of water, but I've never been stronger and never seen more like rapid muscle and general weight gain than with taking Anadrol.
I mean, I've taken, believe it or not, the most I've taken is 1 a day. I've talked to some pros after, I got done competing, to some of the more recent pros that were doing like 4 to 5 Anadrol a day. When I did Anadrol, the first cycle I did, it got me to bench over 520.
That's unbelievable.
It was like one of the best steroids for strength gains. But, if you read the insert of that steroid, it says that if you take this long term, it can give you leukemia. So I was really afraid of that steroid overall as a really dangerous, toxic steroid.
Well, and anything that's methylated is going to have that negative effect on the liver. Almost all of the anabolics have a negative effect on your cholesterol, like on your lipid profile. Like it'll raise your bad cholesterol and lower your good cholesterol. One of the only oral anabolics that I've seen that doesn't typically have a negative impact on the liver or a negative impact on your lipid profile is methanolone, which is a drug called primobolan. And there is a primobolan acetate oral that you can take a relatively high dose of. It's mostly anabolic and has almost no androgenic effect. It doesn't aromatize, and it seems to be all the side effect free. Well, women definitely, Primobolan is super popular with women, both injectable and as an oral.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to have any masculinizing effect at all. The only problem is that it's so expensive and it's so desirable that almost everything you find in the market that says it's methanolone or says it's Primobolan is fake. It's something else.
That's the big problem. Like, you know, when I was competing back in the day, you could actually get these steroids from a pharmacy. And they weren't, I was saying, you know, I had people like saying they were still illegal. They were still illegal, but they weren't considered what we say when they passed the Anabolic Steroid Act, which becomes a class 3 drug.
Exactly.
Which is like taking cocaine or heroin, correct?
Well, no, cocaine and heroin are actually Schedule 2s, which is kind of above, but a Schedule 3 is the same thing as like a codeine or something like that. It's, you know, the scheduling is designed based on how addictive or how dangerous a drug is. So the fact that testosterone or anabolic steroids are scheduled at all is kind of silly. I think there's a lot of people who disagree with that. But the issue is they were trying to mitigate the use of anabolic steroids in sports. So by scheduling them and making them illegal and making, you know, possessors or sellers of anabolic steroids criminals, they thought that would mitigate their use in competitive athletics, which clearly has not happened. And it's also just made the cheating in sports just become way more sophisticated.
That was passed in 1992, I think.
Yeah, the Anabolic Steroid Control Act, and then there were subsequent revisions to that as well. So it puts them under the purview of the DEA. Many of them are available in the U.S. still. They're prescribable. A lot of docs shy away from it. Yeah. But there are drugs that are used for anti-wasting or for burn victims, for anti-aging.
You know, we're talking about steroids. These drugs are not used for bodybuilders. There's a medical purpose for using these steroids. Like Anavar is used for what? For, you know, someone goes through like that was burned.
Absolutely.
Or someone who has HIV.
Absolutely.
They were doing Anavar.
Absolutely. Or things like nandrolone, like Decadrabble, another great drug for things like that, for anti-wasting. I mean, there's also, even within the anti-aging world, there's some physicians who are touching these drugs like the Anavar, like the nandrolone, specifically for, you know, age-related muscular decline, you know, fatigue, weakness, things like that.
So sarcopenia, that's a word for, you know, guys past 50 and you know, like myself, I'm trying to slow down sarcopenia as much as I can. I'm doing, you know, TRT. I mean, it's funny today how you fast forward from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you took any type of steroid, you were like taking drugs, like you were just scum.
Absolutely.
And now it's 20 years later that it's accepted. You see guys like the guy who owns Amazon.
Jeff Bezos. Absolutely.
Bezos, you see how muscular he is now. You know he's on TRT. You know, he's closer to my age. And you got to see these guys that look amazing because you know they're on TRT and they're on drugs like Anavar. You can go to these clinics and they can prescribe you Anavar where it used to not be something that you could ever get.
Well, no, you're seeing a lot of anti-aging clinics, but there's a broader approach to anti-aging now too, they're teaching proper nutrition. We've learned a lot more about macros, supplementation, things like creatine, essential amino acids. There's a ton of things that are going into that, but you also have peptides for wound healing and peptides for increasing IGF-1, which is, you know, downstream from growth hormone. You have anabolic steroids optimizing testosterone. You control and mitigate estrogen, control and mitigate DHT conversion. There's all these things that we can do to be able to help to stave off the age-related sarcopenia. And if you can maintain lean muscle mass, then you can mitigate all-cause mortality just by holding on to your muscle. It's just that important. Like if there's one thing you can do to live healthier and live longer, it's to maintain your lean muscle.
Exactly. I mean, you know, it's funny because, you know, I post, you know, me doing legs and you see me doing 8, 9, 10 plates on a leg, but I can do eccentric really slow. They're like, why are you doing it? You're 60 years old. Why would you lift that heavy? That's stupid that you're lifting that heavy. Because I can. And I'm maintaining muscle mass, you know, for someone at my age and doing that in the gym and still beating up guys in their 20s and 30s that I'm able to do that. To me, it's the fountain of youth that I'm able to maintain and keeping, I'm not maintaining. I'm not like I was in my 20s when I competed in Mr. Olympia. But for a guy in my age that's keeping muscle mass, everything you said, it's not about taking a matching drug, steroid, but it's a combination of everything, proper diet, you know, putting in creatine, glutamine. There's so much fish oils. I add all this together and it causes this synergistic effect that I'm able to keep lean muscle mass. at a much older age that I see people my age that look like they're in a wheelchair.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the thing is that lean muscle does a lot of things. One is it drives metabolism. Just having lean muscle increases your basal metabolic rate. So your body's burning more calories just from holding on to that muscle. Muscle also stores glycogen. So it pulls sugar out of your blood. So it also helps to control things like how much insulin your body releases and insulin resistance. And if you look at things like Alzheimer's, they're now referring to that as type 3 diabetes. So when you maintain your lean muscle and your muscles store that glycogen, your body's not producing as much insulin to control your blood sugar, and you're able to stave off potentially things like Alzheimer's that are related to insulin resistance.
And that's one disease that I look at that like just kill me if I get Alzheimer's, because if you lose your brain, you lose everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And people don't realize, it's sound mind makes a sound body. And I constantly look at the effects of making sure that I'm sharp mentally, physically as well, but sharp mentally.
Well, and you just said a sound mind makes a sound body, but the inverse is also true, is that if you have a sound physique, if you have lean muscle, you're going to be able to help maintain a sound mind.
Yeah.
Everything is synergistic, and it all goes into, like you just said, it's a comprehensive approach. It's hormones, it's potentially drugs, it's peptides, it's exercise, it's nutrition, supplementation. It's a comprehensive array of things to be able to maintain your health and your longevity.
So we talked about a little bit on oral steroids. You have to beware that they can cause liver damage or raise your liver enzymes. I don't want to say liver damage. You have to really take excessive amounts to cause like liver damage for a long period of time.
Absolutely.
And that's where, people out there that are using, say, Anadrol, they're doing 5 or 6 Anadrol. You can't stay on it for 6 months. You said like cycles should be no more than 6 to 8 weeks.
For an oral steroid, like 6 to 8 weeks, typically, unless it's something that's super safe. Sometimes you'll see things like Anavar. People go 10 or 12 weeks. Things like Primobolan, if it's legitimately Primobolan, you can go a little further than that. You'll see people do bridge cycles where they'll do a heavy cycle of hardcore anabolics and they'll bridge it with something like an Anavar or Primobolan. So there are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, 6, 8, 10 weeks is really as much as you want to stay on, with at least an equal amount of time off, and then some sort of liver support along the way during and after the oral anabolic.
Use the liver support. Mention some of the liver support. I mean, we sell a product called Liver Detox, but how important some of the ingredients, just have people like milk thistle and some other ingredients they use to help the liver. Why you're taking an oral.
Well, the natural supplements are super important because it helps to detoxify the liver. On top of mitigating the increase in liver enzymes and things like that, it also helps to prevent a fatty liver, which is another component.
What is that fatty liver?
Well, it's just like if you have poor nutrition, some anabolic steroids can contribute to it as well. Insulin issues, there's a lot of things that can contribute to a fatty liver, but by mitigating that with something to detoxify it, not only can you control the liver enzymes, but you can also help to reduce the fatty liver as well, which can lead to cirrhosis and all kinds of other things. You only have one liver. Your liver is the filter for your entire body. So just like we've talked about the importance of gut health in the past, liver health is also important. It also has... It's important for metabolizing protein. It's the filter for everything that goes into your body. So, if you're going to use these compounds that are liver toxic, you do want to support your liver with something that helps to process those compounds.
So let's talk about another oral, not a steroid. They're called SARMs, Select Androgenic Receptor Modules.
Absolutely.
These are much different than steroids, and they're more new. When I competed, there were no SARMs. But now a lot of athletes are using SARMs as an alternative or using them in conjunction with steroids, or as you said, a bridging to like going from a steroid to a SARM back to a steroid.
Absolutely. And especially in the highly competitive ranks of bodybuilding or powerlifting or any kind of competitive physique athletes, they're never really off cycle. These days, you see a lot more aggressive cycles. Like you said, back in your day, there was much lower dosages with similar physiques. And now it's like very drug heavy, very dosage heavy. It's become more dangerous. You see more side effects because people are using, these higher dosages that are where you put in the work and the time with a smaller dose. Some people want to get the results more quickly. So the SARMs are another tool in a bodybuilder's arsenal, in a physique competitor's arsenal. And SARMs are different than oral anabolic steroids in that they target the androgen receptor in only certain locations. Like it targets it in the muscle and the bone, as opposed to an oral anabolic steroid that's non-selective where it goes everywhere. It can go to the prostate, it can go to the skin. So you see less issues of things like prostate enlargement. You see less issues of things like acne. You don't see typically any estrogen conversion because they don't aromatase.
Plus liver damage or the liver enzyme raising. I want to see liver damage.
Well, some SARMs do and some SARMs don't. Like I've had the opportunity to be involved in a handful of very small scale SARM studies with actual patients with actual SARMs. And some SARMs that are more potent, that are well known, like RAD 140, for instance, doesn't seem to cause any increase in liver enzymes, whereas some SARMs that are seen to be as like a more cutting type SARM, like Ostarine, for instance, has a profoundly negative effect
Let's mention some of the SARMs out there. So if someone wants to gain strength, lean muscle mass, what are the SARMs to get?
The most popular one by far is the RAD 140. I mean, there's a lot of different options. And the thing is that as they're constantly being developed, there's a lot of these research peptides that are available. So it's like...
That's a different thing. Like you're talking about peptides. Peptides are small chains of amino acids. That's another subject matter that we're going to get into.
For sure.
But SARMs are totally different. They're not peptides. They're a totally separate category on its own.
Exactly. So you have all these different molecules that we have. You have peptides, you have SARMs, you have anabolic steroids, you have secretagogues, you have ghrelin mimetics, you have, all of these different things that go into, physique enhancement and physique competition that work synergistically. But SARMs are a whole new animal. They're thought to be safer because they target only muscle and bone as opposed to just being non-selective like the regular oral anabolics, but they're not risk-free. Some of them do have an impact on liver enzymes. They definitely have an impact on lipid profiles, but relative to oral anabolics, they seem to have typically less side effects, but with some really profound benefits. The only problem is they haven't been around very long. None of them have ever been through the FDA approval process. Not that the FDA approval process is the end-all, be-all. We know that there's plenty of drugs that get pulled that make it all the way through, but you do get a lot of data. So there's not a lot of double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. There actually may be none, but they certainly, at least the bro science we've talked about, the bro scientists have figured out how the SARMs work, and they're definitely effective and certainly seem to be somewhat safer.
So unlike the anabolic steroids, which is class 3, SARMs are not even in the category. They're technically not illegal. They're only illegal to sell.
For sure.
I don't know how you get them. You can't sell them or you can't buy them, but they consider them research drugs. Well, you can buy.
The SARMs are available as research chemicals. A lot of the peptide websites will also sell research peptides, research chemicals. So under the auspices of a research chemical, they're available to individuals. But to be sold as a dietary supplement, to be sold as a drug, there's a bunch of restrictions and prohibitions. So
will they have to be? I'm in the supplement business. It has to be DSHEA compliant. It has to be found in the food supply. If it's not found in the food supply, it's not considered a supplement.
Absolutely. Because that's, and hence the term dietary supplements.
Exactly. But, when I sold pro hormones. There was kind of a gray area that you could sell them at the time. But now, since that, they've enforced the DSHEA Act, which has been in place, which I think is a great law, that if you want to sell a supplement, if it's found in the food supply and you can prove it's found in the food supply, then it can be sold as a supplement.
Absolutely. And I think that the pro hormones is a great example of what's happening now with regards to the SARMs, is that pro hormones were outside of the confines of the guidelines of what a dietary supplement was. They were available in nutrition stores. You could buy them just about anywhere. Now, most of those pro hormones are actually scheduled as Schedule 3 controlled substances, actually, not even just a prescription drug.
Back in the day, when I sold pro hormones, I had a drug called Anadrol. And why I know so much about Dianabol is that Anadrol was a derivative of Dianabol. It was very close. It was a close cousin. So when I was looking for pro hormones that were then legal, I wanted to find something that worked like Dianabol, that was relatively safe, highly anabolic, but had great effects on, strength and lean muscle mass. So Anadrol was that pro hormone. And if you look at them, they're close cousins. And when we talk about pro hormones, what they were the drugs that these research scientists came up with, but never made it into a drug. It kind of just went on the shelf. So there's a list back in the day, I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, when you could sell pro hormones. There's a list of these drugs that were put on the shelf that may have been similar to Dianabol or similar to Anavar. But what happened was Anavar won the battle, and that became the drug. Then Lilly or whoever bought that drug, and that became a drug to be sold. But these pro hormones, there was lists of hundreds of them that were out there, but they just were never made into drugs to sell.
Absolutely. And the thing is, too, is that some of the pro hormones are actually what's called a precursor.
Yes.
Like the very first pro hormone that came out was actually androstenedione.
Yes.
And that is, if you look at the chain of how testosterone is produced in the body, like it converts from DHEA into androstenedione, and then from androstenedione, it can go a couple of directions. The primary direction it goes is into testosterone. So when you would take the androstenedione, your body would convert that into testosterone. And there were some other ones, like there were some other like
1T,
norandrostenedione and things like that your body would convert.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's like, so the liver would convert some things. Like the body does some interesting stuff when you take things orally to help convert certain drugs. So some were precursors, some the body would convert automatically. And then some of them were just Some of them are just straight up drugs. Yeah. So
That's what I told you. I discovered Anadrol, and that was, like I said, a derivative of Dianabol. There's another drug that was really effective as a pro-hormone called 1T. And then there was M1T, which is a methylated 1T, which of course anything methylated is going to cause more, it's going to bypass the liver, cause more damage to the liver and become more effective, which was one of the better pro-hormones out of the market.
Absolutely. And I think you're going to see a very similar market with SARMs to what happened with pro-hormones until that ends up regulated as well. In 2019, there was actually a SARMs Regulation Act. It never went anywhere in Congress, but I think you're going to eventually see that because they're so popular, because they're so available.
Yeah.
And there's been a handful of studies recently, too, that looks at these peptide websites and looks at these that sell both peptides and SARMs and things like that. And it said that something like 80% of the products sold on these peptide websites don't contain either the dosage on the label or the actual active ingredient that's contained on the label.
Listen, I buy all my peptides, I go to a doctor, a compound pharmacy or a doctor like you guys run.
Absolutely.
And they give me the proper dosages for any of the peptides out there, whether you're going to do PPC 157 or TB 500, they're being sold just like you said, but then they don't even give you directions to how much is in the bottle, how much water to dilute it with. So I get people asking me like, how do I use this? I go, first of all, how much is in the bottle? Well, I don't know. It doesn't say. So how am I supposed to tell you how much to use?
Well, even if it says there's 15 milligrams of BPC, it might have 0 BPC. It might have some other chemical. So the problem is there's no quality control. And that's exactly why, like at Renew Vitality, we do all of these types of things. We have peptides and hormones and secretagogues, and you get the right dose of the right drug. It's prescribed by a doctor with a full lab analysis from a compounding pharmacy. Like if you're going to use these medications, especially if you're concerned about your wellness, I'm going to have to talk you into jumping ship over to Renew Vitality as well, Rich. We'll get you taken care of. But no, you need it to be physician supervised. You need it to be physician prescribed. You need to have the right
You want to
dosage.
get blood work done. You want to check your cholesterol, your HDL, your LDL, your triglycerides. You want to check your red blood cell, your hemoglobin levels. There's so much to look at when people are taking any of these drugs. And I want to make sure I'm doing anything safely so that I'm healthy while I'm doing these. Like I said, I'm trying to fight or combat Father Time, but you have to do it correctly, because if you don't do it correctly, you can cause the opposite effect.
That's exactly right. You want to do no harm. You want to cause no additional, negative impacts. And that's the benefit of getting it from like a licensed compounding pharmacy. You get the right drug with the right dose. It's also sterile. It doesn't have particulate. It doesn't have endotoxins. There's no contaminants, which you can't guarantee when you buy stuff off a website.
Here's the thing, Andy. You get what you pay for.
That's absolutely.
You go to a clinic and you're going to basically, get these drugs from a clinic that's going to make sure they do blood work on you so that they can see whether you have any type of issues right from the start. And number two, make sure you're doing them in the proper way so that you don't have any bad side effects, whether your red blood cell count goes up or whether your, liver enzymes go up or whether your, LDL or HDL goes down or your LDL goes up, all the side effects.
Absolutely.
But let's get back. We kind of went off course. Let's talk about SARMs again. There's different ones. Let's talk about the different ones out there. I'll go through them, and you can, if I miss any, you can also bring up Ostrin. Tell me about it.
Well, it's supposed to be more of a cutting type SARM. It has a positive impact on lean muscle tissue, and it's a selective androgen receptor modulator, so it specifically targets both bone and muscle, but it does have a pretty profound effect on the liver. Like I've actually seen patients who are on that SARM, actually a compounded pharmacy, so we knew exactly what it was, with enormous increases in liver enzymes.
Really? So it can affect your liver.
It certainly can. And that's the thing where there's definitely a lot of information that people have picked up off the internet saying that SARMs are safer than anabolic steroids. Well, it depends on the SARM, it depends on the anabolic steroid, but they certainly have less of an impact on things like you just brought up red blood cells, like hematocrit and hemoglobin. They tend to have less of an impact on increasing those, which you have to keep an eye on as well.
A stroke.
Exactly.
You'll realize you have a stroke.
Absolutely. And it's like they also tend to not convert to estrogen, so you have less of an issue with things like gyno. They don't tend to have an impact on DHT or dihydrotestosterone, so there's less of an impact on the prostate. So there are definitely some safety benefits to SARMs. They do target the tissues you're looking to improve, but there's no free ride. And there's certainly very different safety profile, much like there is with any drug, with the different SARMs.
Out there, anybody watching this, no drug is safe. Totally. You can't just take it like it's a multivitamin. It's not a vitamin. These are drugs that you have to be careful in how you take them. So what's the dosages of something like an Ostrin?
Well, it's all over the place. Like the problem is that there is Every different website that you can buy these from has a different dosage, different strength. That's one of the SARMs that I would avoid.
It's a cutting SARM.
Well, that's what it's typically used for, but you see a lot of the same negative effects you would see with drugs like Winstrol or Halotestin, some of the other cutting type drugs.
Steroids we forgot to mention. Halotestin was one of the oros that I took back in the day.
Oh, absolutely. Halotestin is a lot of fighters used to take it before there was testing in mixed martial arts. It was very popular, but it's if there's a roid rage drug, Halotestin is it. It's just, fluoxymestrone is a super potent androgenic drug, doesn't aromatize at all, it doesn't convert to estrogen the slightest. It is almost 100% androgenic, and it's just like, it will, if there were a drug that would cause stereotypical roid rage,
that's
Halotestin is the drug.
So you would take Halotestin. Why would you take Halotestin?
It's a hardening agent. It's a last minute contest prep thing. Powerlifters will take it before meets, things like that.
A week before, 2 weeks before?
Exactly. It's a very short duration. It's super liver toxic.
What's the milligram dose?
I mean, I think it usually comes in about 5 milligram tablets, so 1 to 2 tablets a day.
It's like tablets before a show.
Exactly. And only for contest prep.
We're not prescribing here steroids. We're just talking here, and anything we say here is not telling you how to take steroids.
Well, no, there's no medical advice being given on taking steroids. And it's
on this show.
But no, I mean, people are taking it anyway, and it's also about harm reduction. Like if there's a safe and a dangerous way to do anything, and information is helpful. There's a lot of young people who are out there getting involved with these different types of compounds, and they can either be well informed or they can be misinformed, and the goal is to make people better informed.
The other SARM, LGD, 4033. Talk about that one.
They all have a very similar effect with varying arrays of potential toxicity. That one I've never taken. I haven't seen a ton of information on it.
Okay.
It tends to be mildly anabolic. It doesn't seem to have as much negative impact on the liver. So it's more of a mid-range drug. Like it's more of like a non-aromatizing Dianabol, for instance. Like you maybe get a similar amount of muscle growth to 10 milligrams of D-ball without the water retention or something like that. Like it's not as potent as the RAD 140 when it comes to muscle growth.
That's the other one. Let's talk about RAD 140. Like that seems to be the SARM of choice to use.
It is super popular. The cool thing is that it gives you pretty decent muscle growth, pretty decent strength gains, but it doesn't convert to estrogen. It doesn't seem to impact DHT. It doesn't typically have any impact on liver enzymes, but it will bottom your good cholesterol. That's really the only downside.
So the HDL will drop.
So if you're taking RAD 140, it's imperative a super high potency fish oil supplement, a high dose niacin, B complex. Those things are super. And the duration of usage is probably 6 to 8 weeks at maximum. 6 to 8 weeks. And the dosage on that one is pretty straightforward. It's between about 10 and 30 milligrams. I've seen people get unbelievable results on 10 milligrams. So it's less is more.
So it's going to make you stronger. It's going to make you bigger. RAD 140 is one of the SARMs of choice if you want to get yourself strong. You said 6 to 8 weeks?
6 to 8 weeks is plenty.
30 milligrams.
Exactly. And the 30 milligrams would be if you're just absolutely advanced, higher level guys, a regular guy at the gym who's just looking to make some gains, increase his bench press or put on some lean muscle. 10 milligrams for 6 weeks is more than adequate, but you need something to support your cholesterol for sure.
So if someone's on a steroid cycle, taking their Dianabol or D-ball with their injectable steroids, they go on an 8 to 10 week cycle. They get off that cycle. Would it be suggested then to go on a SARM cycle?
Well, one of the reasons guys like to do what's called a bridge cycle, so they want to maintain their gains. So there's 2 ways to be able to maintain your gains after a steroid cycle, and we'll probably go into this in another episode as well in greater detail. But you can do what's called a post-cycle therapy, where you come off all the drugs and do things to re-stimulate your natural testosterone production, or you'll do a bridge. And a lot of guys will do a bridge with a SARM. The only problem is that the same negative feedback you get from taking anabolic steroids and testosterone that shuts off your natural testosterone production, causes testicular atrophy, shuts down your pituitary function, reduces luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, all those things. You get that similar negative feedback from a SARM as well. So your body still recognizes that.
So even though it's not a steroid, it still shuts down your hormones. It still shuts down your ability to make testosterone.
Exactly. There's something about the mechanism of action is not completely understood, but because it is a selective androgen receptor modulator, the body seems to recognize that something's going on. There's a lot of people who take other drugs along with SARMs by themselves, like enclomiphene, for instance, to stimulate natural testosterone production. to be able to keep the testes functioning while they're on, things like Rad 140, because you can get a natural drop in testosterone. If you're going to bridge a cycle, instead of using something like Anavar, then Rad 140 would have less of a suppressive effect. But really the best way to do it is a full post-cycle therapy in between cycles.
So post-cycle therapy, guys, is doing something like HCG. What are other drugs to do?
There's a ton of different things you can do to be able to run a post cycle, and I think we're going to have another episode also where we get into like injectable drugs, but drugs like HCG, drugs like Anadrol, enclomiphene, Clomid, tamoxifen, raloxifene, tons of different stuff, and those drugs are called SARMs as opposed to SARMs, which we'll definitely talk about as well, which are selective estrogen receptor modulators, which in men have two very different effects that we'll talk about down the road for sure.
Cool. So Andy, there's other SARMs out there. There's so many that they're sold in, health food stores. I heard of another one called YK11. What do you know about that one? It helps muscle density, what I'm reading about.
Well, there's a lot of stuff out there that's supposed to have an impact on like the myostatin gene or to what is a myostatin inhibitor.
That's interesting. The myostatin inhibitor.
Absolutely, exactly. So there's real science with gene editing where they've actually edited out this myostatin gene in mice, and they've done it in a bull and a handful of other things. But to try to manipulate that with a drug is kind of a new endeavor. So there's some injectable options, there's some oral options. Whether or not that's exactly what it's doing or if it's functional, the jury's kind of still out on that.
And then there's some other one. S23 is another one.
For sure, another really potent SARM. There's so many different SARMs that have different effects. My expertise mostly falls within the realm of what I can get access to through a compounding pharmacy and then see used in patients. Anecdotally, at least, the S23 seems to be super potent, but there also is, it comes at a price as well with the negative feedback, testosterone production inhibition, and things like that. And
so it's interesting, people are doing SARMs because they don't want to do steroids yet, but doing SARMs can lower your testosterone.
Absolutely.
They can cause your liver enzymes to go up.
For sure, depending on
the only thing it doesn't do, which you mentioned, it doesn't raise red blood cell count or hemocrine levels.
It doesn't seem to, which is a huge component of taking anabolic steroids. Is you have to donate blood, you have to watch out for because you have stroke and heart attack, all kinds of issues, increased hematocrit hemoglobin.
Especially when you get older.
Oh, for sure.
Guys, 40s and 50s using testosterone. It's funny, I get tested. I'm on TRT. I do 140 milligrams a week. That keeps me at a normal 700 to 800 total T level. My free T is really high. But I test for my hemocrine, red blood cell, it's always normal. So it's good that I keep that normal. Where I get guys in their 40s, they take TRT and their red blood cell count goes right up. They got to donate blood.
Well, and the problem is usually dosage dependent or it's dosage frequency. If you take your dose and split it in half and take it twice a week, you'll typically have a lower peak testosterone level.
That's what I do.
Which leads to lower increased red cell production. It leads to less aromatization, which is conversion to estrogen. So a lot of times you won't need much or any aromatase inhibitors. Leads to less DHT conversion, so you have less issues with the prostate. So it's really like managing your testosterone optimally. And that's why there's just yet another reason why guys should use a health clinic, like Renew Vitality, like anybody who's monitoring your testosterone, looking at your lab work and doing it, prescribed through a physician.
What you just said is they do 70 milligrams every third and then fourth at every 3 days and then every fourth day to basically, or you could do 3 days, 3 days. So basically doing your testosterone that way is a lot safer than trying to do one big dose once a week.
Absolutely. I take testosterone therapy as well. I take 100 milligrams twice a week. I just take it on Monday and Thursday. I take a half a cc. My max levels usually never go above 1,000. I feel fantastic, but my estrogen's under control. My DHT's under control. My red blood cell count with hematocrit and hemoglobin are both under control, and I feel good. I have no side effects. Also, you mitigate things like hair loss. You mitigate things like, acne and oily skin, stuff that can come along with testosterone therapy. And also you need less ancillary medications. So it's
so taking SARMs, does it affect your DHT levels?
They don't convert to DHT because it's selective as well. There's multiple anabolic steroids that can have an impact on your prostate, or you'll see people who get oily skin or acne, some of the typical anabolic steroid side effects. All of those are mitigated by using SARMs because they don't have that impact because they are selective in nature. Like I said, again, they're not risk-free, but you certainly avoid a lot of the negative side effects of traditional anabolic steroids.
Now, we talked about a lot of these anabolic steroids, these orals, they're made from DHT, or they're DHT derivatives.
Exactly. They're DHT derivatives or testosterone derivatives. And you have like your 19 NOR compounds. And when we talk about injectable anabolics, we'll go into a lot of those specific details. There are anabolic steroids that do convert to estrogen, and there are those that don't. And that's where you'll see different issues related to, the aromatization, water retention. And that's where you see like your bulking versus cutting drugs typically.
Cool. I mean, this was a great episode. So much information that we were able to share here about oral steroids, SARMs, really, really, really great stuff that I learned myself from you. Thank you so much, Andy.
Absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Information. Again, you guys like the content that we're doing, give us your comments and subscribe. This is Rich Gaspari, Beyond the Muscle, with Andy Triggs. Stay tuned for our next episode.